Well, good morning, guys. Back with another video. What you're seeing in the background here is just an old box I made, and it's just been sitting on my shelf for about 5 years. And I just figured I'd take it out and experiment with a few different techniques and see what I can do with it. Nothing major, just messing around. And so everything white on the box is new because it was originally stained and covered with a layer of polyurethane. So you can just watch some of the stuff I'm doing there while listening to my comments on an article entitled "The Case of Dostoevsky's General: Some Ruminations on Forgiving the Unforgivable" by Jeffrie Murphy from the journal The Monist, October 2009, volume 92, number 4. It's a little clickbaity in the sense that the article isn't an exegesis of Dostoevsky. It is about forgiveness itself. So it just takes the case of the story from the brothers Karamazov, where Ivan is presenting Alyosha with a scenario about a horrible incident, and sort of testing the idea of Christian forgiveness. So for those who don't recall, basically the story is basically of this crazy general who a surf boy threw a rock and accidentally hurt his favorite dog, the general's favorite hunting dog. And so the general had the boy stripped, told him to run, and the boy was then killed by the general's hunting dogs. So the question is, Ivan says, the question is, what should we do about that? Do you forgive him? Could you forgive him? And at the end, Alyosha says, "Shoot him," Alyosha said softly. So the question that the author wants to deal with is, what is forgiveness, and is there such a thing as the unforgivable? And what's the morality of forgiveness in such unforgivable situations? So the article's really good at exploring, I think, nearly all the logical considerations of forgiveness. The author talks about things like someone who's repentant, someone who's not repentant, who has the right and who doesn't have the right to offer forgiveness, and what does forgiveness mean and what does lack of forgiveness mean. So the author, explores each and every one of those questions in a decent amount of detail, in an excellent consideration, excellent analysis of all the different possibilities and what they imply. So what does forgiveness imply, and what does not forgiveness imply? So this is an issue, the issue of forgiveness, I should say the Christian view of forgiveness, has always been troubling to me. So I think most of us can agree that the Sermon on the Mount is beautiful. It's morally edifying. It is, in a sense, a perfect moral code. And when I was young, when I first came to take my Christianity seriously, it was the absoluteness of the Christian ethic that appealed to me and spoke to me of God's perfection, and that God transcended the normal human paradigms of practicality, in a sense, that God's love transcended ethnic and racial and all those categories. God had no favorites, and he loved all people equally. And I think it also held that his love for people was, I suppose, for lack of a better word, only interested in the love that other people had for people. So in such a dynamic, or such a paradigm, and such a absolute dynamic where it's all or nothing, what does that imply for our treatment of evil? Okay, so do not resist him that is evil. That's something that Jesus says. It's something that Tolstoy took very seriously and spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about. It's the doctrine of pacifism, right? When I talked a few videos ago about the bourgeois Jesus again, part of the thing is that Jesus' ethic in the Sermon on the Mount is, in a sense, some people say too difficult or impossible. And the question then, and some scholars say, okay, looking at that, that means that Jesus was a end times prophet. Okay, that he wasn't laying out a charter of human conduct for, the next 2,000 years like Moses did. Moses' commandments and the Deuteronomic law are very practical. They're oriented towards making a system of government work, whereas Jesus' moral commandments seem not to be able to do that and seem to undermine any kind of commonwealth at all. And so, for instance, when you look at any society has a justice system where crimes are punished, where evildoers are punished, they're restricted, sometimes executed, mainly with two views in mind: protect the community, and number two, to vindicate justice, to make people feel as though evildoers are being punished, good people are being protected, that kind of thing, that justice is being served. So with the forgiveness of sins, how does justice serve? If we're all obliged to forgive and to forgive, then how is evil discouraged? One approach has been, and Tolstoy does this all the time, and Les Miserables by Victor Hugo is based around this also, at least the instigating incident is, where the character Jean Valjean steals some candlesticks or something from a bishop, and the bishop forgives the guy, and then the guy is morally transformed and spends the rest of his life doing good. That kind of trope becomes very important to people who tend to want to defend Jesus's ethic. And so, even from a simple standpoint, we know that, say, raising children or being a neighbor, sometimes being the bigger person goes a long way. So if your neighbor, does something wrong to you, you don't pay them back, which, has a certain attractiveness. And we talked about game theory. And as a game, that has some kind of success. Sometimes tit for tat is more successful from game theory. Sometimes escalated tit for tat is more productive, so that if your neighbor causes you $5 worth of damage, you cause him $6 worth of damage. So he realizes that you're willing to take it to the next level, right? But not $7,000 worth of damage. And that escalated tit for tat, according to game theory, seems to be a very successful strategy. But that's not Jesus' strategy, apparently, from the Sermon on the Mount. And not just from the Sermon on the Mount, there's several indications that this was his ethic in various of his parables and from some of the incidents in his life. Like if we take, for instance, the woman caught in adultery, he who is without sin cast the first stone, that kind of thing. Shall we call down fire from heaven upon them and burn them up? And of course, the story of the prodigal son, that the prodigal father forgives the prodigal son, and the prodigal son is so moved that he transforms his life around. Is that a little bit Pollyannic, or whatever you want to say? I think in a lot of ways, that's a simplistic way of viewing things. When people, for instance, it's interesting in criminology, if people are brought up in circumstances where they've been abused and so on, they simply don't understand actions like that. So anyone who doesn't treat them badly is incomprehensible to the person and is considered to be manipulating them somehow and being sort of roundabout in the basic human nature that we have to be selfish and always looking out for number one and always ready to backstab. So I think it's pretty easy to say that blank forgiveness of sins is not a successful strategy, or at least it depends what you mean by successful. Does it work 50% of the time? Does it work 51% of the time? Well, it doesn't work 100% of the time. So what do we do with those other n minus 1% of the time or whatever? What do we do with those cases? It's these things that the author looks at, and he looks at them really quite reasonably, and he offers even some personal reflections in a way. He says several times, I used to think this, but now I think that, in a few cases, which is interesting. So first of all, he has to define what he means by the unforgivable. And on the third page of the article, he provides 5 definitions for it. He says, I think that unforgivable could mean any of the following. 1, logically or conceptually impossible to forgive. 2, causally impossible to forgive. 3, very difficult to forgive. 4, morally ought not be forgiven. Or 5, morally ought prima facie not to be forgiven. That is to say, unless other considerations are brought to bear. And he reflects on, or he draws on other books and so on that have been written on the topic, and different opinions and so on. Okay, so what does forgiveness mean? So that's a big thing, and that's an interesting thing. I've debated this issue with lots of people, and in my opinion, while I was a Christian, I used to say forgiveness is not what is meant in pop psychology today. I used to call the Oprah definition. Forgiveness, says Oprah, is about the self, and you can forgive an other person because of what it does for you. Okay, it frees you from that bondage. That's not forgiveness. That's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness means is your attitude towards the other person, and it's not about yourself, right? So I reject that definition altogether. Forgiveness, in my opinion, is always something that can only be given when it's asked for. Okay? You can't forgive somebody who doesn't ask for forgiveness. To forgive is to give towards another, to give for a person, right? It's not to give for yourself. So I reject that. And I don't think we can say I forgive Hitler because Hitler didn't ask for my forgiveness. He didn't do anything to me, number one. And number two, he didn't ask me for forgiveness, and he didn't ask it sincerely. Let's look at a definition. And Bishop Joseph Butler, says the author of this article, he defined forgiveness as that it's about overcoming the reactive attitude. Okay, that forgiveness means overcoming the reactive attitude. So the negative attitude that the sin or the crime produced in you. So think about that for a second. If someone punched me in the nose because they didn't like how I eat, bothering them, being punched in the nose hurts me physically, but it also fills me with shame, makes me angry towards the person who did it, takes away my warm feelings towards that person, makes me not trust them. There's a great number of implications for that act. So forgiving that person means overcoming the reactive attitude. Okay? So another way that I reject the modern approach to forgiveness is when people draw the distinction between forgiving but not forgetting, which is often coupled by a distinction between loving someone but not liking someone. Now, I agree about these differences, and I think they're healthy, but I don't believe they qualify as forgiveness. So when I forgive somebody, my child or my spouse or a friend, that's meant to put them back with me towards a state they had with me earlier. Now, I agree that it's impossible to forget, and I think children forget. Like when children forgive, they do forget. And people who espouse pacifism and so on, again, I refer back to Tolstoy, he points to children. Children might fight one day and then the next day act and actually be in a state as if that never existed. I don't think that's a model at all for human adult behavior and conduct. I think that's imprudent to the point of irresponsible. Forgiveness is not an easy thing, and I think our author and various of the sources he quotes, for instance, he refers to Elie Wiesel, who was concentration camp survivor. Various Holocaust survivors say they will not forgive, right? And I don't blame them for that. Now, one might forgive a certain Nazi, but one ought not ever to forgive Nazis per se, right? There's a big difference. And that's something the author gets into when he talks about what do we do about someone who's seriously repentant versus somebody who isn't. Does it make a difference? And in fact, he references an author who says it makes a difference, but quite the opposite of what you think. One particular author says that repentance itself reveals the true gravity of the original crime. So take, for instance, the difference between a sociopath who has no conscience by virtue of the physical constitution of their brain. They don't have conscience. They weren't born with conscience. And so one particular author says that is actually better than someone who was born with conscience and who turned against their conscience and then turned back to their conscience and wants forgiveness. That particular thinker says that that's even worse. So indeed, repentance itself, that author said, is actually more indicting. I don't quite agree with that, but I understand the point being made. I think that psychopaths are their own category, and I don't think we should make moral rules based upon people who are not moral agents. Psychopaths aren't moral agents. And so when I speak about ethics is about moral agents. We don't talk about the ethics of cats, and I don't think we should talk about the ethics of sociopaths, people with no conscience. Okay? So, overcoming the negative, or I should say the reactive attitude. Is that even possible? Okay, so going on a bit further on page 5, the author says, the real project of the essay is to grapple with this question. Under what circumstances, if any, is it morally permissible, or perhaps required, to seek to overcome our natural loathing of such people as the general, and of our natural inclination in vowing never to forgive them, never to abandon our loathing of them? So do we have a moral duty to not loathe? Christians would say absolutely. We shouldn't loathe. But this is, I think, the source of the modern or the present day preoccupation with hate. People, secular people, so social justice people, extreme left-wing people, have taken a Christian notion, which Christians themselves devaluated, and made it an absolute. So if love is that which is good in Christianity, the opposite of love, I guess hate, should be the number one obstacle. Now, lots of people point out rightly that hate isn't the opposite of love, but apathy is. That's an important point. That's something worth thinking about. But anyway, do we have a moral duty to overcome our loathing? According to traditional Christian ethics, I should say, ethics, theological ethics, like Aquinas would point out that which is lovable should be loved, and that's which is hateable should be hated, right? And that's basic common sense that we get from people like Aristotle or Augustine, who says, love better the higher things, which implies love less the lower things. Is it okay to forgive the unforgivable? And depending on what the unforgivable means, if, in generally speaking, it means gravely immoral, a gravely immoral act. Something is unforgivable only when we've decided that there is such a thing that ought not to be forgiven, right? But I think unforgivable, generally speaking, just means that which is very, very repulsive, very morally repulsive to us. So the author says that third parties should not be factored in. And people talk about that, like, I can't forgive the Nazis. They didn't do anything to me. By similar calculus, African Americans can't forgive white people because white people didn't do anything to them. The living white people of today didn't enslave them. Okay? So forgiving on behalf of your ancestors is stupid. It's morally nonsensical. So I agree with that. I think it's a deep conceit is involved with that. It's about feeling morally superior to others, that they were the wrongdoers and their race is the race of wrongdoers, and my race is the race of those who have the moral right to forgive or not forgive. I don't think that that's morally defensible. So, moving along, the notion of human dignity gets brought into it. So, does lack of forgiveness means that you're taking away someone's human dignity? Now, the author reasons this way. So, if you don't forgive a person, that means you don't remove the resistance to them that their sin created in you, the negative reaction that their sin created in you. So you exclude them from your life, right? You exclude them from your life, from your society, from your family, from your time, from your space. And the author wonders, is that dehumanizing? It's punishment. It's punishing. Is it dehumanizing? And the author sort of wonders about that, makes some interesting observations on that. And I think we can distinguish between degrees of dehumanization. Because you don't want to talk to somebody anymore or be around them, that is not equivalent to taking away their human rights. So that, for instance, if they were starving to death or whatever, dying from a curable disease, that you would impede anybody who tried to help them, right? That would be different than not talking to them. So taking away human rights, these are matters of degrees. Then there's a threshold. So the fact that I don't give all my money to anybody who asks or to anyone who's in need doesn't mean I'm taking away their human rights, because I simply don't have enough money to feed everybody who's hungry, right? So that's a nonsensical thing as well. Of course, it does argue to the fact that we can then say that capital punishment, is that taking away human rights? Torture, is that taking away human rights? Well, in the first case, it's hard to have human rights when you're not alive. So you're taking away their life. Are you taking away their human rights? Not easy to say. Torture, yeah, I think torture, depending on what we mean by torture, like to some people, being thrown in prison at all is torture. To some people, not talking to them anymore is torture. To other people, waterboarding or flaying or whipping. These are actual torture, whatever. So it's a matter of degrees, right? So what the author tells us in the end is that there are no simple formulas or decision procedures on these issues. He says, I have suggested that recognizing the general's humanity, even if he is totally unrepentant, goes beyond merely respecting his basic human right. So I sort of disagree with the author in that regard, which is fine. The observation of one's own fallibility has to be factored in, he says. And I say yes, but not in extreme cases. So what does that mean? Fallibility is the he who's without sin cast the first stone. So basically, don't gang up on somebody for things that you're guilty of yourself. I would say that it's bigger than that. I think that fallibility, of course, is very important in the sense that I suppose for shorthand is we're not God, so we don't know all the details of someone's conscience. And so I suppose we have to err on the side of generosity. Not on the side of foolish generosity, but on the side of generosity anyway, in the sense that not assuming the worst about a person. But that does not go far enough to say that because we ourselves lie, cheat, steal, doesn't mean that we have no right to punish murderers, pedophiles, that kind of thing. So that's foolish. And I think a lot of Christians, some Christians, go too far in that regard. So I think the best thing about this article is that the author takes very seriously what forgiveness means. Okay, so he says that maintaining human solidarity with the victims of the general's evil will, place significant limits on the extent of the fellowship that one is required to have, even with the unrepentant wrongdoer. Okay, so that, for instance, if your child was molested and you forgive the molester, well, you're causing severe harm to your child, right? That's very significant. On the other hand, I think people bandy around the word forgiveness far too easily, and they don't mean to integrate the person into fellowship. They mean forgive, but don't forget. And that's not the same thing at all. I believe in forgive and don't forget, but that's not forgiving. Okay? That's sort of my final word on the thing. I've forgiven here and there in such a way that I forget. And I think we do that more often and more easily with family. We forgive in such a way that we actually do forget. We be hard pressed to think, what has this person ever done wrong to me? And I think that comes about because of their record of good conduct to you. Like their relationship with you is so overwhelmingly positive that the transgressions are actually not remembered. Is that forgiveness? Yeah, it is. It can be forgiveness, or it can just be, as I say, that which a child does and actually does forget. It doesn't care enough. Doesn't have strong enough moral sensibility or strong enough rational moral sensibility, self-awareness, or consciousness to be able to consider crimes as adults do. Anyway, the bottom line is, and the lasting thing here is that I think that it'd be a great idea to read this article and challenge yourself to say whether you actually do believe in forgiveness. Do you believe in unforgivable things? People throw around the word unconditional a lot. God's unconditional love. According to Catholic theology or Christian theology, God's love is unconditional, sort of, and it sort of isn't. People's love is never unconditional. Should it be? Of course not. Love should not be unconditional. Absolutely not, because that violates basic philosophical premise that one ought to love that which is lovable, and one ought to love better the higher things. So I challenge you, do you believe in forgiveness? And stop using sloppy notions of what forgiveness is. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, and I hope we're back with another video pretty soon.